Okay, meetings started to
Okay,
record.
so the recording has started. Adityanji, we can go ahead.
Okay. Good evening to everyone in United States and good morning to people in India. Welcome to yet another roundtable discussion for the Council for Strategic Affairs. Today's topic is threatened CAATSA sanctions on India, damage to bilateral India-US strategic relationship. My name is Dr. Adityanji and I am the President of the Council for Strategic Affairs. I think all of you who have registered for this event, I'm pretty sure that you are very well aware about the CAATSA sanctions because it's a very specialized topic. And as you see in our invite, we had two speakers to begin with, Dr. Vibhuti Jha and Mr. Vijay Nilekani. So they will be the two panelists, but we probably will have another surprise guest in our discussion today. And why we chose this topic? Because it really has to do with India-US relationship. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. Council for Strategic Affairs imparts education in the field of international relations and geopolitics. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the awareness. It aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. We do monthly roundtable discussion on every second Monday of each month at 8 p.m. We also have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert. We organize symposia, meetings, and other conferences, and we promote publication of articles on geopolitics and related issues. So we had, as I said in our flyer, two panelists. One of them is Mr. Vijay Nilekani, and second is Dr. Vibhuti Jha. We have a third surprise panelist also that I will introduce later. So let me start with our first panelist. He is Mr. Vijay Nilekani. Mr. Nilekani has a BSc in Mechanical Engineering from National Institute of Technology in Calicut, Kerala. He has a master's in Industrial Engineering from Texas A&M University. He worked in India in Mumbai for Mahindra and Mahindra. Subsequently, he worked in a number of US companies, Bechtel, Exelon Energy, IAC Japan in Washington, D.C., and Nuclear Energy Institute in Washington, D.C. from 2005 to 2014. His career has spanned over a period of 45 years in the energy industry, 8 years in oil and gas, 37 years in nuclear energy. And I won't say it is inappropriate to mention that first time I met Vijay was in a nuclear energy conference. It was for a Carnegie Endowment, International Endowment for Peace meeting in 2013 in Washington, D.C. when we met first. His current interests are energy policy, macroeconomics, geopolitical development, and travel. He is a multifaceted man with multiple hobbies. He's into adventure sport, hiking, philosophy, history, psychology. He flies planes. He has a pilot's license. He attends various geopolitical development seminars, conferences. He has traveled very extensively to 87 countries in all the 7 continents. And he has spent extensive time living, learning in India, USA, Canada, Mexico, South Africa, and Japan. So, without further ado, I invite Mr. Vijay Nilekani to start his part of the panel discussion. He'll be speaking to us for a period of 10 minutes. Mr. Nilekani.
Okay, thank you. I, I'm sure most of the people in the US are very familiar with CAATSA, but I'll give a very, very brief overview of what it is and what it can and cannot do. For the Indian audience, hopefully they'll have a better appreciation of the complexity of how to deal with it. First of all, the US government and the US Constitution are very different from a parliamentary government. And the Congress and the president almost have equal power, and the Congress, if it has enough seats, can actually even veto the president. So the power is split between a very large group of people and the president. So it's not like the parliamentary system where the prime minister has all the power when he has the members on his side. The US was the only superpower till 1990, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it could throw its weight around a lot more than it can today. It has degenerated somewhat over the last 20, 30 years. As China has risen and the US has developed trade deficits and a variety of problems, it is still the only superpower today, but China is fast catching up. So the US influence has become more complex and more difficult for them to be a bully that they could probably do in the 90s. CAATSA was actually, it's called the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. And it is really not aimed at third countries like India or any other country, but it's really the primary targets of CAATSA are Russia, Iran, and North Korea. However, when other countries deal with these three countries, the US government does have, there's language in the act that allows the US government to bully countries to try and keep them away from these three, what America considers a bad actors. So the subsidiary language is what is a little bit dicey for countries like India and other countries that I'll mention in a second. The act also gives the president the authority to waive the sanctions. So the president can be influenced or educated to say that in the overall national interest, I'm willing to waive the sanctions. So even if Congress says you should act on it, the president does have the authority, legal authority to waive it. So we need to focus on that in case the sanctions are actually applied. The other thing I want to mention is that CAATSA has already been applied very lightly to India when India was trying to buy oil from Iran about 2-3 years ago. And I think India was flexible on that issue at that time. But it has applied it to China as well. And China has bought S-400 missiles from Russia. So CAATSA has been applied to China. The agency that was dealing with the Russians has been blacklisted. Individuals have been blacklisted in China. Turkey also, which is actually a NATO partner of the US, also has been a victim of CAATSA because they also bought the S-400 as well as the other airplanes and stuff. And the US actually has punished Turkey by pulling them out of the F-35 jet development program. Originally, they were going to be manufacturing parts of this very sophisticated jet in Turkey, but they've been pulled out of that now. So India has had a long history of being focused on strategic autonomy. It came out of non-alignment, and India has always wants to have the freedom of movement and freedom of decision making. And so we have been a defense partner of the Soviet Union originally, and now we are a defense partner of Russia as well. Although we are also buying stuff from Israel and France and United States and so on. The US is getting increasingly nervous about India's relationship with Russia. Now, I want to give a little bit of insight into Russia itself, at least my view of the world. Russia is not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a global power. It had a lot of geopolitical interests in Latin America, Central America, Russia, Africa, and Asia. The Russia is really a power to deal with, but it is not a superpower anymore other than its nuclear arms. And so I would say that they should not be viewed the same way that we viewed the Soviet Union. They may or may not be as reliable as the Soviet Union. They could be playing chess with a multiple number of countries. For example, they have sold S-400s to China. They are working on they have an energy trade agreement with China. They have a land border with China. They also have defense relationships with Pakistan. Believe it or not, Pakistan and Russia and Turkey have done joint military exercises. The Russians and Pakistanis are doing some amount of Russia exercises in the Himalayas as well as in the Arabian Sea with the navies. So Russia, I'm not anti-Russia. I think we should work with Russia and we should rely on them for our needs, but we should not view them like the Soviet Union, which was a much more reliable ally. Also, Russia is very opaque, unlike the US. The US generally is very transparent. Even a foreigner, even an Indian on a visitor's visa can go and sit in a Senate hearing or a House hearing or any kind of, unless it's a classified meeting, it's a public access meeting. That is not true in Russia. The Kremlin is very opaque and very secretive. So that should be taken into account in policy making, and I'm sure our Ministry of Foreign Affairs takes that into account. The other thing I want to mention is CAATSA is universally unpopular. A lot of countries around the world think it's a bullying tactic. The European Union doesn't like it because it's been applied or threatened against Germany and France for buying oil and gas from Russia. Singapore doesn't like it. Indonesia and Vietnam have said that they want to do business with Russia, and the Americans are coming in the way. So there are a number of other, not necessarily global powers, but fairly significant players out there that are in the same situation as India. So India should really ally with them and get their lobbying expertise and intelligence too. It should not be strictly we'll get out of Quad if you don't do it sort of thing. I think that could be a part of a subtle threat, but really I feel that we should work closely with the European Union, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and other countries that don't like CAATSA. The other thing is the S-400 is not a be-all and end-all of missile technology. You know, a low-flying drone that is designed to evade radar will still get through the S-400 system. So all those military factors and policy factors have to be factored in the decision making. And also China has a lot more influence on Russia than it did on the Soviet Union. They're a huge oil sales thing. Siberia, the entire economy in Siberia is run by the Chinese. If you go to Siberia, all the stores, all the consumer goods, everything there comes from China. Chinese are living in Siberia and running department stores and grocery stores and whatnot. So Russia, and there's a trade deficit between Russia and China, and Russia has a huge trade deficit with China because Russia only exports military gear, oil and gas, and intelligence, whereas China is a global trading power. So China has a lot more leverage with Russia than we think. So all these factors need to be put into the hopper when making policy decisions, and not a black and white kind of decision making. So my suggestion would be, I think I'm running out of time here in a minute, rather than being publicly threatening and saying we'll get out of Quad, I would say it should be more behind closed doors, more about lobbying the president and lobbying the right senators and congressmen to influence the president. India should get the Pentagon on its side. I know Secretary Mattis in the Trump administration was very pro exempting India from CAATSA. We need to try to convince General Austin also to lobby for the same thing. And I think it's rather than just making a black and white, we'll get out of Quad type of thing. Also remember, in Quad, India is the only non-treaty partner in Quad. Australia and Japan are treaty partners of the United States. They are solid. They have a solid relationship. Ours is a little more tenuous, so we have to factor that in as well. And also the Indian economy, to strengthen it and to continue to earn hard currency, the West is a very important player. Most of our trade is with the US and with Europe. So we need to factor in that we don't disrupt something where we injure India's economic interests, because economics drives the bus here. You know, in any war or any tension, the economy, the balance of payments, the surplus in dollars, all those come into play. So it's very important to not disrupt the economy. And so hopefully, I'm sure Prime Minister Modi and his cabinet are very savvy people, and I'm sure they'll do the right things. And we should ally with the European Union, Vietnam, Singapore, etc., to lobby on our behalf as well, because they are also very unhappy with CAATSA. So those are my main comments, and I'll be happy to take questions as we get into the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mudipuri, for this introduction. And we will move on to our second speaker, who is Dr. Vibhuti Jha. Dr. Vibhuti Jha has a master's degree in economics, an MBA in international management, and a PhD in developmental economics and finance. He is an astute international banker with deep insights in corporate finance and advisory services to large high net worth business owners and companies. He brings with him over 30 years of hands-on experience dealing with credit analysis, asset protection, maintaining capital efficiency and effectiveness for his clients' businesses. In addition, he has unique set of understanding and experience of compliance issues that enable structuring products and services to align with the demands of regulatory authorities. He has been in the forefront of developing India-US Business Forum ever since 1991 in senior management role with American Express Bank. In addition, he is a weekly guest on the Jaipur Dialogue TV speaking on Indo-US relationship, and more recently, he has started his own Jaipur Dialogue USA show to bring a new narrative on things related to India and Hinduism. I have known Vibhuti since 1996, and he is a dear friend. He is an astute observer of geopolitical issues. He is our second panelist, and I'll give the floor to him. Dr. Jha, you need to come on the video.
I'm on the video, am I right?
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Good. So what is important here is what we heard from Vijayji just now. And I will say Vijay because he's an American, so we'll add G later.
No, you can call me G.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You know, like one of the things which is important that he has already narrated the essentials of CAATSA and the general angst against this from around the world. So when you study international management and international banking, geopolitics becomes an essential part of your study. And in that process, you have to develop the attitude to understand things the way they are. One of the quotations from Albert Einstein, which made an impact on me, was that any intelligent fool can complicate a simple problem. It takes courage to move in the other direction. That's very important for us to bear in mind. Now, we know the sanction part of it. You know, India has endured a sanction after the nuclear fallout, the nuclear explosion that India did. So it's nothing new for us. We know that the United States imposes sanction. It's already done on 30 countries. On S-400 issue itself, even Turkey was under sanction. China is under sanction. So what's the big deal about S-400 deal with India, and why is the United States insisting on it? Just bear a couple of facts. Knowing what we know today, that's one of my favorite phrases. Knowing what we know today, what needs to be done. What I do know is that in 1971, Nixon and Kissinger sent Indira Gandhi to the Soviet Union arms. A defense treaty was signed following the prior to 1971 war for creation of Bangladesh that happened. About S-400 as well, I believe that it was Mr. Obama's reluctance that sent India to Russia much before CAATSA came into place. But the important part here is that both times, Americans have been known to be known to be fair weather friends. I worked for an American bank in India. We were corporate bankers and private bankers to the ultra rich people all over the world. And the common saying was that if American banker is coming to you, that means you must be doing well. That was one. Number two, these Americans will be the first one to run away with the umbrella the moment you hit a bad patch. And we had to actually deal with the perception and reality of the situation. And we dealt with that. We convinced people that why the attitude is what it is, because everybody wants to deal with the well-off. That's the reason why people are willing to give an arm and a leg to come to America, even today, despite all all the things that are happening against it. But a couple of thoughts that I will leave behind with all of you here for further discussion is, there are things that we know, it's all over there. Today we are not suffering for want of information. Every information is available literally at our fingertips or in the palm of our hands. Literally. So the question is, what must the United States do in order to not to have a counter to CAATSA, which could be very appropriately named countering American adventurism through sanctions? Think about it for that. European Union, nobody is happy with this. India-US relationship has bordered on part-time lover scenario. We have been called natural allies, strategic partners. But we must remember that India has to choose its own friends. The whole thing rests on India. It is not possible for India to define its strategy taking into consideration millions of factors that exist in the world. So the United States has to take cognizance of India's needs and aspirations. And that is something that India must push hard and hard. So a very simple proposition that I'm talking about here is that on the one hand, geopolitics drives an agenda and economic need drives another agenda. So from 2008, when India had no relationship, military relationship purchased from the United States, today it is $20 billion. Can the United States ignore that? You have Tata Lockheed, you have Tata Boeing establishments already established. Can the United States go back on it? Can Quad be dismantled? So India is needed. The question is for India to assert its efficiency and effectiveness in the relationship. We do know one thing for sure, that the entire waiver thing was legislation was brought in to consider India's requirements. And I think, knowing what I know about CAATSA, that India qualifies for waiver. And I say not waiver. India needs to be accommodated, but CAATSA not applying to India at all. Because you have a scenario in which India is an economic giant today. The investments are pouring in. Chinese are a much disliked group of country that people have ever seen, because China is imposing its own draconian killer contracts on countries to acquire assets and countries by itself. You have the Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific scenario. So can America ignore India's needs? And it will do so only if India is not able to assert its own claim to its own sovereignty, its own strategic imperatives, its own security needs. And there is a very simple thing that I want to throw it out here, that we must question American adventurism in dealing with India. That's something which I've seen for as many years when you carry businesses and everything else in this process, is that no Indian trusts America, while every Indian loves America. That's a very peculiar relationship, because I don't think anybody really configures why India is sermonized by American policymakers with sanctions when America itself violates all norms of international relationships. So if United States have the gall to tell India who to choose a partner, why isn't India telling America that why don't you fix your relationship with Pakistan? Who wants us gone? Why don't you talk about human rights with China, who violates these things? So CAATSA is a tool which came into post-Trump election scenario. Let's remember that. The United States cannot impose that sanction because the S-400 agreement was done much earlier to that. If you begin to bring legislation with retroactive effect, then everybody can begin to pass their own legislation with retroactive effect. So my thought process here is, and I would conclude by saying that India fulfills every single criterion that is used for waiver. And I'm taking one step further. The United States must exempt India. Forget about waiver. Forget about the tactical delay tactics and all that. I'm not into that. I'm into substantive relationship. Are you taking me seriously? If you are taking me seriously, are you taking my needs seriously or not? So the question here is very simple. CAATSA or no CAATSA? We will survive all of it. India will survive all of it, which is America needs to worry about. Remember one thing, in geopolitics, the sun sets on the British Empire. Nobody talks about the Japanese out of management anymore. The issue here is that European imperialism and colonialism is over. Maybe it is coming in through different routes. But we have to, India has to, I implore every person in India to begin to understand, assert our own, India's own geopolitical needs, India's own security needs. I don't, that's a sanction doesn't bother me at all because I'm 100% sure that just as we as bankers impose conditions of satisfaction on our clients for millions of dollars worth of credit facility, and if the client was not doing well enough, we restricted that. So I know the word sanction, how it works. My question is that life doesn't stop because of a sanction. But we are living in a remarkably interconnected world, and Vijay is absolutely right in saying that we have to, we have to develop relationship with European Union and everybody else to take full advantage, to utilize our full potential. So my thought process would be that whether it is, there can't be a compromise on national security of India, just as the United States will not sacrifice on its own national security. So when every American politician says, we are doing this for American people, it's time for India to begin to say, we are also doing this for our own people. And you can't produce a clash of people's wills. And that's what is important. I living in America as an American citizen, I have been warning people that what goes around comes around. I like to simplify things. What goes around comes around, and beware, America, that one day when you are not supplying economic, see, white people are afraid of China because China is in every single American home. In America is not in every single Chinese home or American home. What do we export? Our exports are highly non-consumer durables. We have defense exports and trillions of dollars of exports that we do, but we are running into a major credit risk problem, America itself, with trillions of dollars of along with the United States printing the notes. So I'm looking at it as a concerned person, as an American, and as a former Indian and a lover of India and today as well. I believe that both these countries have a lot to gain being with each other. And America will do well to recognize that India is the one country which is your authentic, genuine friend. And the fear that none of the fears that Americans have about India has ever been realized. Has ever been realized. So I'm saying that India has to take a very strong front foot in dealing with America and reject the concept of CAATSA completely. And that's where the strength comes from. I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Vibhuti. I'm really very thankful to you for quoting me for writing an op-ed piece on India and US being part-time lovers.
Oh, I didn't know that. I love the song, and I have always said that we are time lovers, we are occasional friends.
Just for the audience, I wrote an op-ed piece that was published 8-9 years ago when I characterized the relationship between India and US as part-time lovers, and basically nothing more, nothing less. It is not a marital relationship that we are going to follow each other completely 100%. And our geographic locations are different, our geostrategic points of view are different. There is commonality, there is increasing synergism, increasing convergence on strategic issues, but we shall still remain part-time lovers because of sometimes antiques like this. So let me, go to my third panelist, which is a surprise panelist, and we have somebody joining us from India. And this is Dr. Retired Brigadier Arun Sehgal. Dr. Arun Sehgal is retired Brigadier of the Indian Army. He is the Executive Director of Forum for Strategic Initiative, a policy think tank focusing on national security, diplomacy, and track two dialogues. Brigadier Arun Sehgal was the founder director of the Office of Net Assessment, Indian Integrated Defense Staff, created to undertake long-term strategic assessments. He has a PhD in international relations, and his academic pursuits include being head of Center for Strategic Studies and Simulation of United Service Institution of India. He was at one point in time senior fellow of Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. His research comprises scenario planning workshops, geopolitical and strategic assessment related to Asian securities, issues concerning nuclear doctrine and strategic stability in South Asia, with focus on China, India's neighborhood, and India-US strategic relations. His recent work has included study of Nepali Maoist and Madhesi movement in Nepal. He has co-authored several books that include Relinking India with Central Asia, Security and Economic Dynamics, which was published by Johns Hopkins University, uh, a book on Sino-Indian confidence building measures, published by Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and a book on Afghanistan and India. His other works include net assessment studies on Pakistan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and India, and India-China Military Balance 2020. Currently, he is working on two important projects: anti-access and non-contact war, doctrinal and technological perspectives and baseline scenarios in the time frame of 2027. He was the member of National Task Force on Net Assessment and Stimulation, which was under National Security Council, and continues to support them through consultancy assignments with DRDO. He recently finished a monograph on strategic stability. His specialty is in long-term assessment, political and security risk analysis, and scenario building. He is member of a number of Track 1.5 and Track 2 initiatives. So he will present the Indian viewpoint. So Brigadier Dr. Arun Sehgal, the floor is yours, sir. Arun Sehgal.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Aditya. It's a pleasure to join such a cultured audience at a panel in the United States. Actually, mine is a self-inflicted injury. I got the invite and I said, hello, we have done some work on CAATSA in India. And why don't I share our perceptions and thoughts on CAATSA? We have done a detailed analysis of CAATSA, and I've heard two eminent speakers before me, and I generally agree with their views. But to deal with an issue like CAATSA, which is quasi-legal, as somebody mentioned, and as also very highly geopolitical, we need to understand the nuances. The first fundamental point we have to understand is that the CAATSA sanctions are what we call, I think Mr. Jha said, are secondary sanctions to us. It's not a primary sanction. We're not a primary sanction country on this. The secondary sanctions are imposed on India primarily because of the simple fact of what we call the significant transaction. If a country carries out a significant transaction with the entities which are banned are liable to sanctions. Number 2 point is sanctions, when they are imposed, do not come in bits and pieces. From the menu of the sanctions, you have to, if they are imposed with 5 sanctions simultaneously. They run from various aspects, financial sanctions, uh, individual, personal, and all. Now, having said that, we are also aware of the fact that the National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 allowed the President of the United States. Earlier, Mr. Trump was not given the leeway of wavering sanctions on his own. He had to go to Senate every time. But now the NDA, thanks to Mr. Mattis's actions and his intervention, the President of the United States can give a waiver, but that waiver is relevant only for 30 days. After that, it has to go. So there are complexities involved. I will not go. Number 2 point I would like to highlight is that Turkey was sanctioned because of S-400, but the Chinese were not sanctioned for S-400. The Chinese were sanctioned for Su-35s. Number 3, India, the reason why the whole issue of S-400 is becoming important is primarily because of the American experience in Syria. And the Americans started flying into Syria using F-35s. They suddenly came against this highly intrusive system of the S-400, and that shook them up. And the reason, therefore, that Turkey was sanctioned was because the Americans were concerned that because of S-400 location, the electronic signatures were being picked up. This is as far as this thing is concerned. Now I come to the geopolitical part of it. Fundamentally, US has cited to India its concerns regarding interoperability of the S-400 system, the US origin equipment in India's arsenal. We don't buy that argument, and I'll come back to you on that a little later. As far as geopolitics is concerned, as everybody mentioned, India and US have a widespread strategic and security relationships. But you have to also understand that India is not a junior partner of the United States in the Indo-Pacific. We control the Indian Ocean region, and we are the only player of consequence in the Indian Ocean region. The consequential aspects of the Indo-Pacific remain relevant only and only if India is on board. The United States equally needs India in maintaining the credibility of free and open Indo-Pacific on a rule-based order and to restrain Chinese assertions in the region. It is not America's call, because American power and influence, please understand, ladies and gentlemen, that American power and influence is East Asia centric. And out of this East Asia centric power and influence, one is a very, very reluctant power, that is Japan. Australia does not have the heft to do anything of strategic consequence. So the only credible player that they have in East Asia are the United States itself. And the fulcrum that is provided to the United States by its bases in Japan. On the other hand, starting from the Malacca Strait, Southeast Asia, through the Lombok and the Sunda, and coming into the Indian Ocean, the most credible player today is India. Now, I also want to disabuse one simple fact is that the Chinese naval modernization apart, Chinese ability to leverage maritime power in the Indian Ocean is yet about 5 to 7 years away, by which time we hope to have created credible naval and military capabilities. There's a lot happening in India in terms of development of technological development. which and this is all something which is happening post the Chinese intrusion in Ladakh. We have a converging relationship with the United States, and we have told the United States in no uncertain terms that if CAATSA sanctions are imposed, it will undermine that basic edifice of this emerging relationship. The entire edifice of the foundation agreements which India has signed with the United States, as BIGA, CAATSA, etc., are dependent upon shared information. If there is no shared information and if there is no flow of information and data from the Americans, and we are not operating as part of a broader security envelope in the region, then this whole thing makes no sense. It makes no sense to us. They have to take a call. They have to take a call whether that United States wants to be a partner of choice, and like one of the leaders said, India as the fulcrum, a Western fulcrum of the Indo-Pacific strategy, it is their call, and we are very sanguine that the Americans understand this logic. The issue of Quad came about a couple of times. We have to understand that India's integration with Quad is a two-way street. We have to understand that. At one level, our relationship with the United States, particularly our defense cooperation relationship with the United States, I've done a big study for National Security Council just a week or 10 days back, is based on internal balancing. Internal balancing essentially means that providing us capacity, capabilities, etc., for which we are very grateful to the United States, particularly coming at a time during the Chinese intrusion in Ladakh. Americans have been more than helpful, and I think it does no harm to acknowledge that fact. They came way forward in supporting us. The second issue is we need a phase of external balancing. Because the kind of projects and the developmental process that India has launched, we need a medium-term period of 10 to 15 years to develop our own capacities and capabilities. And during this period of 10 to 15 years capacity and capabilities, we need external balancing. The United States is a strategic partner for that external balancing. Having said that, for the United States to exercise influence in Southeast Asia, and even in the South China Sea, its capacity to do it on its own is limited. It has to be a joint enterprise connecting the two oceans to be able to exercise influence and to restrain Chinese behavior. We also note the fact that India is the only country which has walked the talk and imposed economic sanctions on China. Nobody has done it, not even the Americans. Very limited. We have banned most of the Chinese products, and we are now telling them Chinese we are not going to walk the talk. Even in the vaccine diplomacy, in the South Asia vaccine diplomacy, we said we are not going to walk with you. So the question basically today is this: that CAATSA cannot be made by United States of America as a singular point of aim or focus to define our relationship. Then it is going back old elements like somebody said, Americans can't be trusted, blah, 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 etc., etc., etc. The new geopolitical realities demand that United States, India, and other quadrilateral partners, and what we now talk about is quadrilateral plus partners, include Vietnam, Indonesia, etc., we all work jointly together, not so much to deter China but to influence Chinese behavior to be a more rule-based player. In our perception, when I talk about myself, I cannot talk about the government, but what little work that we have done, our perception is the United States understands this. United States understands this more than anybody else does. And the United States is not going to go do any action which unilaterally undermines this relationship. I think I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll take it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Brigadier Arun Sehgal. And that's the voice of a rising and shining India, eloquent, articulate, and strategically clear. So it's a very sound message to our friends in the State Department. If the State Department is listening rationally, listening carefully, they'll pay heed to the strategic advice you are giving to the US friends and partners. And that's very important because ongoing dialogue between two strategic partners is very, very important. And as some other speakers have also said, that India, prizes its strategic autonomy. We may not believe in non-alignment at this point in time, but there is something called doctrine of Indian exceptionalism. India has never played junior partner to any world power at any point in time, despite adversity. India has been the most sanctioned country starting from 1947 onwards for various reasons. Initially, because of the Cold War, from 1974 onwards for the Pokhran 1 nuclear explosion, from 1998 onwards for Pokhran 2 nuclear explosions. So, yet another bout of sanctions will not make much difference to India. If I may use one folksy proverb from India, what US is trying to do is to cut its nose to spite its face. They just don't understand the impact on the bilateral strategic relationship. First, they don't understand who is their strategic adversary, whether it is China or whether it is Russia. Russia is not Soviet Union. One great statesman in 19th century, and that was German Prussian politician and first chancellor, said in 1871, you don't want to see how law and sausages are made. So you don't want to know how CAATSA was made. CAATSA had nothing to do with, geopolitics. It has to do with the democratic politics of United States, the balance of power between Congress and the presidency in a divided and very fractured administration, and the fear, bipartisan fear in both the parties, that you had a mercurial president who was romancing North Korea, Kim Jong-un. So the three countries, Iran was already on a leash by JCPOA, which was terminated by Trump as president. There was open invitation to Russia to interfere in the US elections in 2016. So you need to understand in what domestic situation CAATSA was created. It was not so much to sanction these three countries, but it was to hobble the presidency, which was not relied on by both the parties. And that is where the secondary sanctions came. The law was passed in 2017, and in 2018, it was amended again at the behest of General Jim Mattis. That provision for waiver was created. How many of us know that this country had passed a Chinese exclusion immigration law in 1894? How many of us know that this Congress passed in 1924 an Asian Exclusion Act to ban the undesirables? Where are those laws? Where are the Jim Crow laws? So to say that it is a US law, laws have come, laws have gone, and CAATSA will also go. How many of you know that authorization for use of military force in Iraq 2002 is being repealed as we speak just now? House has already, voted to repeal it. It will be upturned in the Senate because it was a very, very bad law. A number of presidents, including Nobel Peace laureates, utilized the same law to, extend the war in the West Asia. So laws come and go. No law is perfect. This law is very poorly designed, and I think it is in United States strategic interest to save itself from its own laws, because enactment of this law by putting secondary sanctions on India will be a geopolitical victory for Russia. And that is what these people do not realize. So I use that time for my own comments. I will take questions from the audience, and we have certain rules about the questions. Only those audience who identify themselves, they are allowed to pose questions. Questions are to be sent through the chat function. We want people to be very precise and specific. Don't write an essay in the chat function because I would not be able to read an essay. So your question has to be very precise and specific. Let me start reading from the chat function what these questions are. So the first one is from Ankush Bhandari. Ankush is based in New Jersey, and he is also part of Council for Strategic Affairs core team. So he is saying, let's take a scenario that if US put India under sanctions for a certain period, like 6 months or so, just to put India under pressure to purchase arms only from USA, do you think it will impact Indo-US relations for long term or inflow of FDI? What are your thoughts on this? Mr. Banker, you want to answer that?
Sure. Thank you, Ankush, for asking a very relevant question. The sanction for 6 months or 8 months, it will only lead to a permanent scar on Indo-US relationship. That's my firm belief. I don't think India is going to suffer economically because one of the things that we know from our work is that if I stop funding somebody, they find some other source. So there is always plenty of money available to invest. But it will hurt America more because now we are living in a remarkably close technology-driven society where news travels instantly. It's no longer a 3-day wait for some news agency to deliver the news. We are virtually living, thanks to the tectonic shift brought about by technology, that we are on this platform today. So the repercussion and reaction from India would be the permanent scar on Indo-US relationship, given the fact that this is going to be a secondary sanction. To punish India for the acts of Russian intransigence, if I may say so, which Dr. Adityanji very succinctly put it, that this was driven by a domestic need of the two political parties to fly the kite against India in this scenario would be counterproductive to American interests. And I think Americans are not simpletons. They know exactly what they are doing. They calculate. They may not be the chess players, but they are also strategic players in the world. They know how to create the narrative, and they spend time in understanding the narrative very seriously. So I think this particular 6 month, I feel, personally speaking, I'm with Mr. Sehgal on this, that India's imperatives have been defined, and US must not take India for granted. And insofar as the sanction is concerned, I firmly believe that it's not coming. I'm making a declaration here today. It's not coming.
Brigadier Sehgal?
Thank you.
Our fundamental principle is friends don't sanction friends.
Right.
One. Two, a scenario of limited sanctions is is very much catered for by us, but depends on what kind of sanctions. We also we are not we have to be considerate about the legislative functioning of the country. There are political and legislative issues that they have to go through, and we have to understand that there are other implications. This is a scenario which we have thought through, and all I can share with you or say is that if there are inconsequential sanctions, we'll probably ignore them. But uh, 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 like Mr. Jha rightly pointed out, that it will have an impact on the relationship, because then the political in India, as you know, is a very loud democracy and too many opinion, and every guy has an opinion over here. So there would be a setback on the relationship. But this is a scenario which is not discounted. Limited sanctions, inconsequential sanctions, uh, just to safeguard some legislative craving in the United States. Uh, that's something which is not unexceptional, but it will not be a good idea.
Vijay, do you have any comments on the same?
Yeah, I think my gut feel is that the Department of Defense will have more influence on this decision than any other department, including the State Department. And I don't know the relationship between General Austin and Indian military today, but if it's anything like Mattis or even close to what General Mattis said, I think he will have a big voice in saying this is a bad idea, don't do it, and just give a regular waiver, because I think that is very possible. But I don't know the dynamics, the political dynamics between the Ministry of Defense and the Pentagon. Brigadier might have a better sense for that, Brigadier Saigal.
So,
Okay, we have a reasonably good relationship with this, but our understanding is slightly nuanced on this issue. We feel that in this administration, the State Department is calling the shots, not the Department of Defense. Department of Defense is slightly on the back foot at this point in time. They are still finding their feet, and so the messaging is more from the State Department rather than from Pentagon. Pentagon will support India. You're right, absolutely.
thank you, Brigadier Saigal. I will take a couple of comments here, and I will start with your statement, friends don't sanction friends. I think there was a saying in the so-called West when there were sanctions being imposed on South Africa. Maggie Thatcher used to say sanctions don't work. And really sanctions don't work, especially if they happen to be unilateral. CAATSA sanctions are unilateral. None of the allies of US are participating in this sanctions program. They are not endorsed by United Nations. It is extraterritorial jurisdiction application of a domestic law which should not impinge the right to conduct international relations by a sovereign country. That is where the situation is. Even if the sanctions are put in a symbolic manner for a limited period of time, let me tell you what is the danger. So I said that US would be cutting its nose to spite its face. Why? In 2005, Indian military procurement from US was zero. In last 12 years, India's military armament procurement from US is $20 billion. In year 2020, India purchased armament or equipment from US worth $3.4 billion. Sanctions will mean lack of flow of dollars into United States. Something else has happened. United States is the second largest supplier of crude to India after Iraq. because India cooperated with US by curtailing supplies from Iran, a good friend of ours. So if there are substantial sanctions, India will probably have to retaliate. I think India is now having the spine to insist on reciprocity in international relations. It was not there 10 years ago, but for last 7, 8 years, India has developed the spine. And in geopolitical issues, they are trying to make sure that there's reciprocity in relations. So if you sanction us in a substantial manner, there will be counter sanctions. And the loser will be United States because all the new revenue that we are in a trade surplus situation. India has a trade surplus from US. The increasing trade in arms and oil that US is getting, they will not get that. But more than that, the perception in India and India's policy establishment and geopolitical expert is that United States is a fair weather ally. It's not a reliable ally. And United States, by its own actions, will be reinforcing that notion, and future Indian governments will not be able to trust US at all. So that would be an unfortunate scenario. There are some sane voices in United States, and I can quote them. Senator Todd Young, the senior senator, Republican from Indiana, is beseeching the Biden administration not to impose sanctions on India. The Conservative Heritage Foundation, Jeff Smith, South Asia Fellow of Heritage Foundation, is giving the same argument. Richard Rosso, the Wadhwani Chair Professor on India-US policy for CSIS, again has given a very detailed explanation, and Ambassador Ken Jester. So there are sane voices in US establishment also. All they are hotheads like Bob Menendez, the senator who is chair of the Foreign Relations Committee on Senate, has made very toxic statements exhorting Lloyd Austin to pressurize India and State Department to pressurize India on various issues and impose sanctions. But, sometimes democracy is messy, and US democracy is actually much more messy than Indian democracy. And you are seeing the messy democracy under play without any sort of regard to consequences. So that is what I would like to say in relation to Ankush Bhandari's question. At this point in time, I don't see any other questions. So any last comment from our panelists?
Yeah, I think it's a fluid situation, and I think there's enough goodwill in America today for India in the House and in the Senate and in the State Department as well as Defense. I think there's a very good chance we'll get a waiver, and there are enough Indian Americans in the Biden administration also who could actually weigh in privately as well. So I believe we should subtly lobby, not loudly up on the front pages, but the embassy and its registered lobbyists and all should approach all the right players and continue to make the case. And I think Biden will hopefully give us a waiver on it, because like you said, the whole thing is a political scarecrow. It's not really a meaningful act for third countries. I can understand American hostility to Russia because of the cyber threats and a lot of other issues, Ukraine and whatnot, but they should not take it out on third party partners and friends. And I think good sense will prevail eventually.
Vibhuti, you have any last comments?
Oh, sure. I mean, I totally agree with Vijay and in this regard, and you made a very powerful observation. One thing which I do know is that America is smart enough to know that India cannot be taken for granted anymore, and that the political leadership in India has made a new narrative and established the new narrative. It is important for Americans, and I hope Vijay is right, that the number of Indians who are in the Biden administration will will understand the nuance of the whole Indian scenario, even if they are Hindus in name only. I will dare to say that. The point of the matter is that that's not important anymore. The important is strategic intent of the two countries, which is critical. And there is a tremendous amount of wisdom has gone in here. And I would say that the US will not want its reputation damaged forever. The scar, the unreliability that Americans are a fair weather friends. This image and this narrative must go from America. And I hope the immense goodwill that we have here translates into a bigger clout. Unfortunately, we Indians, as one senator once told me, that we love you Indians as immigrants to this country. You are educated, you are in the highest median income, you have family values, you take care of your children, you are least problem from a law and order perspective, apart from an occasional white collar crime. You are in the highest median income and you ask for nothing. So we have lost that sense of asking. And it's time for us to demand what we must.
Brigadier Segal, any last minute comments from you?
I think everything has been said. All I can say is that the relationship is on a very even keel at this point in time. Both the United States and India understand each other well, and I don't think, I must say, Biden administration has picked up the gauntlet from where Trump has left it, and it has moved even better. There are far too many geopolitical issues in Asia right now for America to play favorites or play the sanction game. Uh, the the American foreign influence itself is under strain because of the Chinese assertions and the way the China is trying to flex its muscle post. So I think there is an understanding even in New Delhi is that we need this partnership, we need this relationship, and we both understand each other. And to that extent, I think some of the good decisions which have been made by lobbying by influential Indians who hold so much of capital in good capital in the United States is to tell the American friends that it is a losing proposition to single out India at this particular point in time. So I say we in at least in my think tank, Delhi Policy Group, we are quite sanguine in the strength of the relationship. The people you mentioned are our partners, with Rick Russo and CSIS is our partner. Congestor is we are in regular touch. At least twice a week we talk to each other on in the U.S. Defense Cooperation issue. By and large, so we are in touch with the policy think tanks as well as with the establishment. So we think that better sense will prevail, and like somebody said, uh, the stage of sanctions will not come. It will not come, but the S-400 is coming in September. That's what I will say.
Thank you, everyone. Before I close, I have one parting comment to our friends in the State Department. And I have a deep memory, and I'm going to repeat this because at certain point in time when I was growing in India, the State Department used to say that international relations and geopolitics is not a zero-sum game. Just because we partner with you does not mean that we will cease to have all relationships with Russia. Russia has been a time-tested friend. Yes, India is diversifying its armament procurement. There was a time when Russia provided us 90% of our needs. At this point in time, we are getting 58% of our procurement from Russia. We are also procuring from Israel and France. The fourth largest procurement is from United States. So to think that India will stop importing armament from all other countries and will have sole supply from United States at inflated prices, yesterday's technology, that's not going to happen. International relations and geopolitics are not zero-sum game. Just remember what you used to say when we exhorted you about Pakistan. So we are saying the same thing. Decide who are your strategic adversaries, whether it is Russia or China. You cannot do dual containment. It's just not possible. So we had a very fruitful and productive panel discussion. My thanks to all our panelists, the three of them, with their wisdom and with their erudition. I hope State Department and Pentagon are listening to this sage advice. Somewhat blunt, but very sage advice. Our interest is in fostering the bilateral strategic relationship between India and United States. As we have said, we are part-time lovers. We can agree on certain things, but on other things, sometimes we have to disagree. And that disagreement should not actually convert one into a jealous curmudgeon. So with those words, I will end this panel discussion. Thank you, everyone, panelists, as well as for audience. And we will come again next month on second Monday of the month for another round of roundtable discussion. Thank you and good evening.
Good night.
We are going to end the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right, everybody.